They called her Trouble back then, not because she was loud or reckless or rebellious, but because she asked too many questions. Why couldn't she sit at the front of the bus? Why did her school have broken windows and outdated books? Why did her mother flinch when police drove by? Lorraine Johnson was only 12 the first time she saw a man dragged from a diner for sitting where he shouldn't. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, one hand clutched to her lunch pail, the other pressed to her chest as if holding in her breath. She didn't know the man, but she would never forget his face, bloodied and defiant. That was the moment something shifted inside her. She started listening more closely, watching more carefully. By the time she turned 17, that quiet fire had grown into something fierce. In 1963, Lorraine got on a bus with a group of classmates and church elders and rode 14 hours to Washington, D.C. They packed sandwiches, wore their Sunday best, and tried not to think about the threats they'd received for even planning the trip. The air on that bus was electric, hope tangled with fear, excitement stitched into the hymns they sang to pass the time. When they finally stepped onto the National Mall, the scale of it took her breath away. Hundreds of thousands of people, black and white, shoulder to shoulder, united not just by skin but by belief. That dignity was not a gift, but a right. She heard Dr. King speak, his voice deep and clear, echoing across time. She didn't fully understand the power of that day while she stood there, dust on her shoes, sweat running down her back. But she felt it. Like history itself had wrapped around her and whispered, "You belong to this moment," and she believed it. Lorraine didn't stop when the march ended. While her classmates went back to their routines, she threw herself into the movement, attending meetings in borrowed basements, passing out flyers, sitting in courtrooms with trembling hands as her friends were sentenced for protesting. She joined voter registration drives in the Deep South, where sheriffs made it clear they weren't welcome, where the nights felt heavier, watched. More than once she was shoved, spit on, told she was nothing. But Lorraine held her head high because she had seen what unity could look like. She had heard the chants, felt the rhythm of progress under her feet. Still, life in her own neighborhood remained stubborn. Racism didn't wear hoods anymore. It sat behind desks, wore police uniforms, lived in the glances of store clerks. She married a factory worker, raised 2 kids, and taught history at the local school, where she was quietly told to keep the personal stuff out of the classroom. As if history wasn't personal, as if her entire life wasn't part of the story they didn't want told. Even after the headlines moved on, the fight never really left her. Every job interview she was passed over for, every neighbor who crossed the street instead of speaking, every time she was told to be grateful because things had gotten better. Better didn't mean equal, better didn't mean safe. And Lorraine knew that. She watched crack rip through her community in the 80s, watched policies disguised as tough on crime strip dignity from boys who looked like her son. She watched the rise of hope and heartbreak, Rodney King, Barack Obama, Trayvon Martin, each name etched into her memory, carried like weight. Now Lorraine is 78. Her hands, once raised in protest, are swollen with arthritis. She moves slower, but her mind is sharp, her memories vivid. She spends her days in a modest house on the edge of the same city she grew up in, the same city that once tried to swallow her whole. What's changed is complicated. There are black CEOs now, interracial couples on TV, but Lorraine knows not to be fooled by the surface. Because when her grandson Jamal walks home from school, people still lock their car doors. When her granddaughter Aliyah shops for makeup, she's still followed down the aisles. She sees it. Feels it. The same sickness, dressed in new language. It hit her harder than she expected. Maybe because she'd convinced herself that the world had shifted, at least a little. That her grandkids wouldn't have to carry what she did. But the day Jamal came home furious, slamming the door, saying a cop had stopped him just to ask questions, she saw a look in his eyes that mirrored her own from all those years ago. Not just fear, not just rage, but a deep, cutting sense of why. Why does this keep happening? Why aren't we past this? She sat him down that night and told him about the man in the diner, about the bus ride, about how change doesn't come in waves, it comes in generations. Jamal listens more than he speaks. He's thoughtful, intense. Aaliyah is the spark, bold, curious, unafraid to challenge. Lorraine watches them and wonders how history managed to fold back on itself. She fought so they wouldn't have to. But here they are, in the thick of it. Different slogans, same struggle. Different tools, phones, hashtags, live streams. But the roots haven't changed. Her heart aches, not with despair, but with urgency. Because she knows they're walking the same road she once did. And this time, they are the ones leading. Lorraine always prided herself on her independence. Even now, in her late 70s, she insisted on doing her own grocery runs, her own errands, her own walking down to the post office to buy stamps the way she always had. It was a small store, just a few blocks away, one she'd been going to for years. The cashier knew her by name. The route was familiar, the people usually polite enough. That morning she only needed a few things: milk, bread, and some cereal for the kids when they came over. She moved slowly through the aisles, her steps measured, her breathing shallow. It wasn't until she reached the checkout line that she noticed the man in uniform, posted by the entrance, watching her. Not casually, not like someone keeping an eye on the general store. His eyes followed her like a shadow, narrowing every time her hand reached for a shelf. She tried to ignore it. This wasn't new to her. She'd been watched before, but there was something different in the way he moved when she reached for her purse, like he was waiting, like he had already made a decision about who she was and what she was capable of. He approached her as she was digging for her wallet. No greeting, no explanation, just, "I need to check your bag." Lorraine blinked, stunned, thinking maybe she'd misheard. But no. He repeated it, louder, more forceful. She asked why. He said there'd been a report. She asked of what. He didn't answer. There was a line of people behind her now, eyes on her back. She could feel her ears burning. She told him no. He reached for her bag anyway. Her hands clutched it like it was sacred. She told him he had no right, and then came the words she hadn't heard in decades. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." That phrase, that threat, it shattered something inside her. Jamal happened to be nearby, picking up lunch with a friend across the street. When he got the call from a bystander, someone who recognized Lorraine and knew Jamal from school, he ran. By the time he arrived, Lorraine was outside the store, trembling, her bag still clutched to her chest like a shield. The officer was inside now, talking to someone, laughing. Jamal didn't say anything at first. He just took out his phone and hit record. Lorraine begged him not to make a scene, but it was already too late. He filmed the store, the guard, the look on his grandmother's face. They humiliated her, he said later in the video he posted that night. For what? Buying cereal? For being black in a place they didn't think she belonged? The video spread quickly, not just among their community, but far beyond. People shared it with outrage, with disbelief. Lorraine had become a symbol, her tired face frozen in a frame of quiet resistance. But with the support came the threats. Comments that said she was faking, emails calling her a liar, messages telling Jamal to watch his back. Lorraine told him to take it down. "It's not worth it," she said. But Jamal wouldn't, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been quietly shamed and pushed aside and then told they were imagining it. He said, "They don't get to rewrite what happened to you." The school said it was concerned. That was the word they used when they pulled Jamal into the office. Concerned about the video, concerned about the tension it was causing, concerned that he was creating division. Jamal sat there, arms crossed, listening to the principal, a black man even, explain why maybe it would be better to stay quiet, to take it down, to not jeopardize his college recommendations. Jamal didn't yell, he didn't argue. He just stared at the wall behind the man's head and thought about everything his grandmother had gone through, thought about how silence had never protected her. Aaliyah, on the other hand, was not silent. She stormed out of class the moment she heard what happened. She posted her own video. She went on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter. "My grandma lived through the civil rights movement," she said. "She got spit on and pushed and called names and she still showed up. And now you're telling me she can't even buy groceries without being treated like a criminal. What are we even doing?" She said it with tears in her voice, but also with fire. That video reached more people than Jamal's. She had kids from school messaging her to say they didn't realize it was still like that. Parents called the house to thank her. One teacher pulled her aside and said, "You're brave." But bravery didn't feel like comfort. It felt like anger that never let her sleep. At night, when the phones were off and the house was finally quiet, Lorraine sat with them on the porch. The same porch where she'd once played jacks as a girl. The same place she'd waited for her brother to come home from protests in the 60s. Now her grandkids sat where she once had, their faces lit only by the porch light and the flicker of distant traffic. They asked her what it had been like back then, really like. Not the textbook version, not the filtered stories, and she told them about the fear, the strength, the songs they sang to keep from breaking, about the time she was almost arrested for trying to vote in Mississippi, about the day her best friend disappeared and no one ever investigated. She didn't sugarcoat it, but she didn't let it be just sadness either. She told them about the beauty too, about the way strangers would link arms without knowing each other's names. How people brought food, water, blankets for marchers. How love and rage lived side by side, holding each other up. Jamal asked her if she thought it had all been worth it. Lorraine didn't answer right away. She looked out into the dark, into the trees that whispered like old friends. Then she said, "I thought maybe we were getting somewhere. I really did. But maybe we don't reach the end. Maybe we just pass the baton. And now it's your turn." Aaliyah rested her head against her shoulder. Jamal didn't say a word, but something shifted in the silence between them. Something weighty, like a legacy being handed down not with fanfare, but with quiet trust. Lorraine didn't want her grandkids to have to fight, but if they were going to, she would make sure they knew where they came from. Not just pain, not just struggle, but power. Unshakable, undeniable, generational power. It started with a flyer Jamal made on his phone during lunch break. Black text on a white background, simple and direct. "Stand for Lorraine, community gathering this Saturday. Enough is enough." He posted it to his story, and Aaliyah shared it right away. By the end of the day, kids they didn't even talk to were resharing it. A local activist group reached out, offered a microphone and some speakers. A DJ volunteered to play music. A church down the street offered to open their doors in case people needed water or a place to cool down. What Jamal thought might be a handful of neighbors and some of his classmates began to feel like something real, like something bigger than him, or Aaliyah, or even Lorraine. On the morning of the protest, Lorraine stood in her kitchen folding a dish towel over and over again, her hands tight and uncertain. She didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked Jamal as he tied a sign to the back of his bike. He nodded without looking up. "We have to," he said. She remembered saying those same words to her own mother 60 years ago, standing in their tiny living room with shoes that were too thin for marching. Her mother hadn't understood back then, and maybe Lorraine didn't fully understand now, but she knew the same flame that once lived in her chest was now burning in her grandson's, and it was no longer hers to carry alone. By noon, the small park at the edge of their neighborhood was filled with people. Not just teenagers and activists, but elders, young parents pushing strollers, shop owners, pastors, teachers. Jamal stood at the front with a bullhorn in his hand, heart pounding so loud he could barely hear the murmurs of the crowd. Aaliyah was beside him, holding Lorraine's hand. The sign she carried read, "She marched so we could walk free, but we're still marching." Lorraine didn't want to speak, but her presence alone spoke volumes. She stood there, shoulders back, head high, in a simple navy dress and the same hat she wore to church every Sunday. To some, she looked like a relic. To others, a reminder. But to Jamal and Aaliyah, she was the reason they were there. Jamal stepped up first. He didn't read from a script. He just started talking. About how his grandmother was humiliated. About how she'd spent her life trying to build something better, only to be treated like a threat in a store she'd been going to for 20 years. He said he didn't want to live in fear of being stopped for nothing, or having his name in someone's mouth just because he spoke out. He said, "My grandma taught me to be proud of where I come from. But this place, this country, it doesn't always feel proud of me. We're tired of that." Then Aliyah stepped up. Her voice shook at first, but it steadied with every word. "We're told to stay calm. We're told to stay polite. But they weren't polite to her. They weren't calm when they followed her around. We're done shrinking ourselves just to make other people comfortable. We're not asking anymore. We're demanding. This is our community too, and we're not going anywhere." People clapped, cheered, some even cried. And when the march began, just a loop through their neighborhood, it wasn't loud or angry. It was steady, rhythmic, purposeful. Children held hands. Elders walked slowly, arm in arm. The chants came naturally. "Justice for Lorraine. We are not invisible." Still marching. Lorraine didn't chant. She just walked, eyes fixed forward, her steps more sure than they'd been in years. But with visibility came exposure. That night, after the videos and photos of the protest were shared online, the pushback began. It came in comments, nasty, anonymous, full of venom. It came in the form of a brick thrown through their living room window while they were eating dinner. It came with the police showing up too late, taking notes like they were checking boxes. "Probably just some kids," one officer said. Lorraine looked at him with a weariness that didn't need words. It wasn't kids, it was history, clawing its way into the present. Jamal tried to stay calm, but his hands shook for hours afterward. Aliyah refused to go to school the next day, not because she was scared, but because she was done pretending everything was normal. "Let them be uncomfortable," she said. "Maybe now they'll finally listen." Lorraine tried to keep things steady. She made breakfast like usual, folded laundry, watered the plants. But the silence in the house had changed. It was heavier now. Not with fear, but with the weight of knowing that standing up had consequences. That even now, after all these years, the price of being visible, of being black and unapologetically vocal, could still be violence. And yet, there was no talk of stopping. If anything, the threats only deepened their resolve. Support began to grow. Neighbors showed up with plywood to board the window. A local bakery brought pies and sandwiches just because. Someone taped a note to their mailbox that read, "Thank you for speaking when so many of us stayed quiet." Lorraine read that note over and over again. It reminded her of the letters she used to get during the boycotts in Alabama back when she was sure she was alone, only to find her name whispered in rooms she never entered. They knew more trouble might come, but for the first time in a long while, Lorraine didn't feel like she was fighting alone. Her grandchildren had picked up the baton, not because she asked them to, but because the world left them no other choice. And as the days passed, as the community continued to show up in small but powerful ways, they all understood something unshakable. There would be no turning back. Not now, not ever. Lorraine sat at the dining room table, the same one she and her husband had bought in 1972 when they finally saved up enough to stop renting and move into this house. The wood was chipped along the edges, stained with decades of meals and memories, but it had held strong, just like her. In front of her sat a box, worn and faded, its corners frayed, its lid barely hanging on. Inside were snapshots of a life lived in resistance. Black and white photos of marches where people clutched signs in trembling hands, grainy pictures of young men in suits, women with pressed hair and fearless eyes, church programs, newspaper clippings yellowed with time. Lorraine hadn't opened this box in years. Maybe she hadn't wanted to remember how much they gave. Or maybe it hurt too much to see the echoes of her past reflected in her grandchildren's present. She picked up a photo of herself at 17, standing outside a courthouse with 3 other girls. Her fist was raised, her jaw was clenched. She remembered that day clearly. How it rained, how her legs ached, how her mother had waited by the door when she got home, silent, relieved but not proud. Pride had always come second to survival. Lorraine smiled at that version of herself, the one who had no idea how long the fight would be, how deeply it would dig into her bones. She passed the photo to Aliyah, who stared at it like she was holding a sacred artifact. Without a word, she took a small magnet from the fridge and pressed the photo onto the door right beside her school schedule. "So, I don't forget," she said. Jamal found another one, a shot of Lorraine leading a group of women into a meeting hall, her hands clasped around a clipboard, eyes fierce, determined. He scanned it into his computer, added it to the flyer for their next event. Beneath her image, he typed, "Still marching." It became their motto, their rallying cry. The phrase began to appear on t-shirts, posters, murals, shared and reshared until it became something bigger than just their family. It became a reminder that the past wasn't over. It was still unfolding, still living in every step they took. But it wasn't just the image of Lorraine that gave people hope. It was the fact that she was still here, still watching, still speaking when needed. Her story gave shape to something that felt too vast to name. She had become a thread connecting generations, a living bridge between what had been and what could be. People who'd never met her began writing letters. Some called her Mother Lorraine. One message read, "I'm white, 34, from Iowa. I never understood until now. I'm sorry it took so long. I see you." Lorraine kept that one by her bedside. Of course, not everyone was inspired. There were still calls at odd hours, whispers on the street, people who rolled their eyes or crossed to the other side when they saw Jamal in his hoodie or Aliyah with her bold, unfiltered voice. But that was the truth Lorraine had always known. Change did not come from comfort. It came from the tension, from the stretch, from the choice to stand even when sitting would be safer. One evening, they held a community vigil in front of the library. Not because someone had died, but because they wanted to honor those who had lived and resisted. Lorraine sat on a folding chair at the front, wrapped in a shawl, her cane resting beside her. Aliyah lit a candle and handed it to her. Jamal stood behind her, resting his hand on her shoulder. People came forward one by one to speak. An elderly man shared how Lorraine had helped him register to vote when he was too scared to go alone. A young girl said she never felt seen at school until she heard Aliyah speak. A mother, crying, said she finally had the courage to talk to her own children about race. And then someone handed the mic to Lorraine. She stood slowly. The crowd fell silent. She didn't speak loudly, but every word landed like truth pressed into the air. "When I was your age," she said, "we marched for the right to be heard. We were beaten, jailed, pushed out, but we never stopped walking. And I see now, all these years later, you're still walking, and it hurts that you have to, but it fills me with something I thought I'd lost. Hope. Not the kind that waits, the kind that moves, the kind that builds, the kind that looks like each of you." She paused, then added, "We don't all have to agree on how, but we all have to show up. Because silence doesn't protect you, it just delays the damage. Speak when it's hard, stand when it's risky, and if you ever feel like it's too much, remember, someone walked before you so you wouldn't have to walk alone." The crowd clapped. Some cried. Jamal held back tears but didn't look away. Aliyah squeezed her grandmother's hand like she was anchoring herself to history. This wasn't just about a grocery store, or a protest, or a video that went viral. It was about inheritance, about how pain and pride can exist in the same breath, about how movements don't die, they evolve. They live in classrooms, in kitchens, in conversations between generations. They live in the decision to speak up at work, to teach your kids the truth, to vote with your whole chest, to show up even when the cameras aren't rolling. And maybe that's the most powerful thing about this story. It's not unique. It's happening in families across the country, quietly, loudly, painfully, bravely. It's a reminder that the fight for justice isn't a moment, it's a lifetime, and every step matters. So if you're watching this and wondering what your role is, here it is. You are part of this too. Whether your grandmother marched or you're the first in your family to speak up, you belong. Your voice matters, your presence matters, and your silence, now more than ever, is a choice. Don't wait for permission to care. Don't wait for the perfect words. Just start, speak, show up, pass it on. We're still marching, and we need everyone.